but as I did, I also realized that the ocean really didn't look the same as my 5-year-old memories, reminded me that it did. And the coral didn't look the same, the fish numbers weren't the same. So many things like that were just
in your own lifetime. In your own lifetime, yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed even the spots that I dove as a kid were so different, and that was shocking to me, and that, I think, is what just really filled me up with a bunch of questions of why.
So everybody, welcome to the Sea Has Many Voices. This week I'm really excited that the guest is the not the dog here, no. Kimi Werner, a world-renowned freediver, sustainability, truth seeker, thoughtful person that I've heard a lot about and read about, and was introduced to me by my good friend Porter Turnbull, who's a familiar guest on the show. And thank you for spending a little time with us today in Hawaii here at Porter's house. And we were able to grab you or get a little bit of your time during a chiropractic treatment, which you're welcome to continue to do. I love free diving myself. I'm more of a scuba guy, but I've done a bit of it. And one of my favorite movies is The Big Blue.
Yes.
Do you like that movie?
Of course.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, that's kind of like one of the holy grails for free divers.
Yeah.
It is better down there. Well, there really is something about it. Tell me in your words. I mean, I can tell you how I feel about it. I'm so excited about it. But there's something about being down there. What is it? Is there any way you can put it in?
I think for me with free diving and going to the depths of the ocean, it just it's such an inward journey. I think that's why I like it so much, is because in traveling, away from air,
Yep.
Just on, your own single breath that you're holding, I think that there's just so much mental journey of just letting go and trusting and relaxing into what could be fear. But I think my favorite part is just once you pass that point of your neutral buoyancy and you become negatively buoyant, and then you can stop kicking, and then the ocean just feels like it's just sucking you down, and you can feel the pressure squeezing you more and more and more. There's just something about that feeling that I've never felt it anywhere else, and it's just like this big pull pulling me home, and this big hug at the same time. And being able to look up and see how far away that light is, but to see it flickering on the surface, that's my favorite part about it.
A lot of our listeners won't really know what free diving is, but it's breath hold diving, and it's what dolphins do, it's what whales do, it's what seals do, and amazingly, humans are pretty good at it. I mean, if we allow ourselves to, and there's a lot of similarities in our physiology that mimics marine mammals. We have a lot of the things called, this is for our listeners, obviously not you, but the mammalian diving reflex. And mammalian diving reflex is basically a system where your heartbeat will slow down, your circulation of blood to your extremities will be restricted a little bit, and it extends the amount of time that you can spend at depth. But what I wanted to ask you, Kimi, is there are dangers associated with free diving. The one that I think of is shallow water blackout, and because the deeper you go, the less you feel the need to breathe, because the CO2 is not sensed. What is that thing? There's something in. How does that work? There's something in our blood that measures CO2, right? Is that that's something I don't know. It triggers the breath reflex.
Right. Well, and I think the less CO2 you have, then the more you're not going to feel that urge to breathe.
Right.
But I mean, at the same time, and I think this also, when the deeper that you go, the further down, any movement you make, it just burns
Yeah.
so much more oxygen than
Yeah.
it would at a shallower atmosphere.
Right.
And so what you can do at 30 feet compared to what you can do at over 100 feet, it's going to have a different cost. You
Right.
know, even if it's just swimming from me to you, even if it's just moving my arm.
Right. Right.
Like anything I do at depth is going to use so much more oxygen than it would at a higher atmosphere. And
Right.
so, you know, and then along with that, when you're coming back up and your whole compressed body and your organs all start to expand, they start to kind of, you know, suck that oxygen back into those extremities and into those other places. And so when you get up, and this is why I believe it's called shallow water blackout, because usually you do get into trouble in the depths because
Right.
of how much you burn, but you don't normally feel the effect until you're right about by the surface in shallow water. And I think another reason for that is because you know, as you get up towards the surface, everything starts to expand, and when your lungs expand, they, you know, suck the oxygen back
Oh.
into it, which oftentimes sucks it right out of your brain. That's funny, but yeah, when your lungs expand, they oftentimes just suck the oxygen back into them and can take it right from your brain, and that's when it just lights out.
Has that happened to you?
Actually, it hasn't.
No.
It's happened to dive partners, and
Oh, so
and I've definitely saved people from shallow water blackout, but
that's one of the cardinal rules, isn't it, with free diving, is you always want to be with somebody
Yeah.
partly for that reason. But
Right.
but that's one of the things that I've always loved about getting down deep is when that urge kind of begins to dissipate.
Right.
And I know exactly what you mean about the energy. It's like I'm also a dive instructor, and I always have this thing where I haven't taught for 1,000 years, but I used to start off my classes going, how long can you hold your breath? Right? And everybody would say 10 seconds, 20 seconds. I said, well, within the next hour or next 10 minutes, you're going to be doing it for 2 minutes. And all I would do is put a mask on them and have them relax and hold on to the side of the pool. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you let your muscles relax, you stop burning a lot of oxygen, and you can, you know, your breath lasts a really long time. But I know that's not the reason that you have chosen this path in life. From what I've gathered, you're on kind of a mission to, which I think I share with you in some ways, and this show definitely shares with you, which is, you know, how are we going to make our way forward on this planet, this small planet, traveling 67,000 miles an hour around the sun with, you know, this little. I was looking at a picture of the Earth the other day from the shuttle, and you know, when you look at the Earth from a certain angle from space, man, that atmosphere is like razor thin. And that's all we've got between us and the outside space, and it can really show you how easy it is that we've tampered with it, you know, with the pollution in the atmosphere. So, how do you fulfill your mission, or what's important to you, or is it communication? I mean, you're really good at that. And why are we here?
You know, I think that, I think that answer is going to be a little different for everyone. I do just think that when it comes to us as individuals, we all have, in a way, like a different reason, a different calling, a different specialty. And it just kind of starts with examining ourselves, examining our choices, examining our passions and all of that, and not stopping that. You know, when I first started freediving, like, it was just, you know, for food. It wasn't an environmental reason. It was just that that's how my dad fed us when we were
Really?
kids.
Can you go back to that? I'd like to hear that part of your story, because I've heard that. I read about it in your material. You said you started for food. Mm-hmm. So your family, yeah, if you could share with us that.
When I was really little, when I was like, you know, up to the age of maybe 7, my family was really poor at the time, and we grew up on Maui in Haiku. And my parents both worked, but they just didn't make a lot of money. And so to feed us, my dad would go spearfishing to put food on the table. And a lot of times when he would do that, my mom was working as a waitress, and so he would just kind of have to take me with him. So I was about 5 years old when he introduced me, he says maybe 4 years old, to that underwater world. And it all started off with him just kind of towing me along on a boogie board while he would try and go get dinner along the North Shore. But I always ended up splashing off the boogie board and wanting to just watch whatever he was doing, and so soon he stopped bringing it. And it was just basically my job to keep up with him, just to keep up. And it was great. Like, I absolutely loved it. I just loved everything about that world. Like, it just made me feel so tiny, and I had never seen, you know, such creatures, such colors, and then I put in my orders for dinner and watch my dad go down and bring them back to me. It was just the most satisfying thing ever. And so that was our life, you know, and my dad did that part of it, and when we'd come back, my mom was the one that would always teach me, you know, how to clean the fish and how would prepare it, and just the, you know, I mean, I guess in a way I didn't understand I was learning all this environmental stuff, because she was the one that just taught us just not to waste and to always respect where it comes from, not to take more than we need, you know, and that even just like the guts or the scales can be used to then fertilize the same plants that grew and nourished us. And so in her own way, she was really the one that kind of taught me about the harmony of nature and I guess our place in it. Well, that didn't last very long. Soon my parents both started making pretty good money. Their hard work paid off. My mom at 41 saved up enough money to go to the Maui Community College. She got a nursing degree, and my dad's construction company actually became successful, so they both ended up having really, you know, nice careers, and we moved out of the boonies into a subdivision and lived a very civilized life, getting food like how
normal people do.
Yeah. And
well, of course, the way you were getting it though is how normally humans have gotten it for maybe 200,000 years.
Totally. And
yeah.
I was already so like in love with that way of life that
Yeah.
it was felt very unnatural for me to change. And even though I knew I was supposed to be happy and proud, and now we could, you know, go to a school and get nice clothes and get food from stores and restaurants, I remember just not understanding it and not like feeling like it didn't make sense. I didn't like store-bought eggs. I missed crawling under the house every morning and visiting the mama hens and, you know, just taking what I needed and whatnot. And I felt like that food was almost just so fake, and I just didn't understand things. And it took a while, but of course you adapt. And I got used to this modern way of living and grew up that way. And then it wasn't until I was 24 years old, and by then I had been living on Oahu. I moved here at 18. I went to a community college myself. I got a degree in culinary arts. Food was always my thing.
Yeah, I saw that. You've got your culinary background. Yeah, it's fascinating me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think at that point I just realized, like, man, like if this is going to be it for the rest of my life, because now I'm out of college, I have my job in the restaurant industry, I'm like, I'm just not that happy. And the more I kind of did some soul searching of why, the more I just thought back to, again, those really early old days and how special they were to me. And I think my whole life I kind of just wrote that off as nostalgia and as something that I was so lucky to experience, but it no longer exists in a modern world. And then after a while I just realized, you know, maybe it can, and maybe it could, and maybe I have to stop just daydreaming about it and actually just go see about it. And so that was when I got a 3-prong spear, and I was living in the city at the time, but I drove out here, not too far from here actually, and I just swam out by myself. I didn't have any dive partners at the time. Anytime I met somebody and asked them, I didn't get any phone calls. So finally I just went, and
that's kind of gutsy.
It was. I mean, when I tell the story of that first dive, I mean, I have to admit that as soon as I got out of the car, I just felt like anxiety. And I remember walking across the beach with this 3-prong and seeing people look at me, and I felt like embarrassed because I knew that I had no idea what I was doing. And then I got in the ocean, and it wasn't even a nice day to be out there diving, and I just felt more anxiety and more anxiety. And I just was swimming, but just like, it was just really becoming apparent to me that this could all be a mistake, and I just don't know what I'm doing. And and the one thing that was really cool about that
That's
day,
usually when you're onto a good idea, I found.
that's so true, right? Like, if you
Yeah.
don't feel that anxiety and those nerves,
Yeah.
you're probably not doing enough. But
Right.
but yeah, right when I was about to turn around in the distance, this white cap just kind of broke, and when it broke, I saw bubbles. And when I saw bubbles, it just immediately calmed me down, and it was this triggered reaction from back when I was 5 years old, because like I said, my job was to just keep up with my dad. And sometimes I'd get distracted and see a turtle, and I'd look around and my dad would be out of sight, and I'd feel so scared, and I'd always have to kind of put my head under the surface and look at the very edge of my vision, and if I could see the bubbles left by his fins, it was just an immediate like street sign of comfort of swim that way now. And so that's what I would do whenever I wasn't doing my job of keeping up. I would just like really look, because he wouldn't wait, and really look for the bubbles, and that was where I knew to go. And so the funny thing is that even as a 24-year-old woman, yeah, when I saw those bubbles, it calmed me down. I'm like, oh, swim that way, even though obviously it wasn't my dad. But I just kind of started using that as a trick to trigger this sense of relaxation and calm, just enough to keep going. And eventually I did. I came across this little reef, and I looked down and I saw the little fish that I knew by heart, you know, not the ones that I was cooking with in the restaurants that were frozen and coming in from afar and whatnot, but just the fish that I used to watch my dad get and help my mom clean. And after a whole bunch of trial and error that day, I just tried, and I came out of the water with about five of these little fish.
What kind were they?
They were an assortment of fish that kind of like live in little caves and shadows. So there was Mempachi, a veil,
Yeah.
Kole, and a hole. So basically it was squirrelfish, tangs, and just fish that don't get much bigger than this. But I brought those home, and I cleaned them and I cooked them, and it was just like the most satisfying feeling that I ever had. And one thing I also noticed is walking out of the water that day, I just felt so different from when I walked in. I just felt like this is it for me. Like, this is what I want to do. And it just proved to me that, you know, even living in this modern world, that if I put in a little more effort, all those things that I loved about the old ways, they don't have to be nostalgia. You know, I can find a way to incorporate them into my life. And it just really changed my life. It really, really did. Sometimes, you know, after that, when I started showing up at barbecues with my own fish, I started then getting all the phone calls and people who wanted to dive with me, and every dive partner I met, I learned so much from, and soon I got better and better. And then when I had fish to share, like, I'd be really selective with who I shared it with, because I experienced it before where, you know, I'd give someone a fish, and then later when I check up on how they cook that fish, which is important to me because I care about the, you know, the follow through.
Yeah.
If it sounded like they didn't, it was still in their freezer, or they weren't really planning to do much with it, like, I just be like, okay, that person's not getting fish from me anymore, you know. And so I really became selective, even if I had to drive across the island to get it into the hands of somebody who I knew would appreciate it. And without even trying to, you know, what happened is that I ended up choosing people who truly cared about nature's resources. And what I found is that in the weeks to come, I'd have avocados at my door, or chicken eggs, you know, or garden greens. And so before I knew it, it was like, I felt like all these old ways of, like, you know, the olden day ahupua'a system of just people sharing from mountain to ocean. You know, when one person's mango tree goes off or avocado tree goes off, that's just too much for them to possibly eat. And everyone is kind of giving what they could. It really just started forming this more sustainable, but at the time all I knew was, this more quality of happiness when it came to life. And so that's why I got into it. But as I did, I also realized that the ocean really didn't look the same as my 5-year-old memories, reminded me that it did. And the coral didn't look the same, the fish numbers weren't the same. So many things like that were just
in your own
so
lifetime.
drastically
In your own
different.
lifetime, yeah.
Yeah, because once I knew I had this thing, I obviously then wanted to go back to Maui and go to the same spots. And I noticed that even the spots that I dove as a kid were so different. And that was shocking to me. And that, I think, is what just really filled me up with a bunch of questions of why. And so as I continued diving, and got better at it, it allowed for me to travel. I was able to ask a lot of questions to a lot of different people all over the world, really. And whether they were fishermen or scientists or whoever, I just wanted to have these conversations and learn. And that was when I just learned about so many things that I wouldn't have even thought of. I wasn't thinking about climate change. I wasn't thinking about microplastic pollution or watersheds and runoff and overfishing and just how everything affects everything. Industrial farming, it's like everything, like it was just so complex that it was overwhelming at first. It was like almost hard to connect the dots, but the more that I had these conversations, the more I realized, like, how many issues and challenges our Earth and and therefore, of course, our oceans are facing. And again, it was overwhelming, but it also just made me then just connect more and more and more dots and realize that it all just comes back to the decisions that we make, as a society and as an individual. And I realized the first thing I can do is try to at least make my own individual decisions a little more in harmony with the places that I love. And so if that meant figuring out, how to try to eliminate as much as I could single-use plastic, how to do more to not contribute to climate change, how to protect our watershed, all of these things, that's what I was going to do. And if I could use my voice or the images that we create to kind of just talk about this.
Fantastic,
Yeah, not
just what we need,
too
Kimi.
much of a preachy way.
It's just what we need,
Yeah, or in a doomsday way, but in an empowering way. That's the only way that I get motivated.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I love your story, and you're right on track. You described you really grew up with really an indigenous kind of relationship with the ocean and lifestyle, where the ocean was kind of, I want to introduce you to, he's actually here behind one of the cameras, Evie Tong, who's from Kiribati, and he's a free diver and lives the life that you're talking about today. And in Kiribati, they call the ocean their refrigerator, because most people don't have refrigerators there. So when they need fresh food, they go out into the ocean and get it. But I think the indigenous has become a very popular topic now in world affairs that I'm a big supporter of. I think that there are indigenous value systems, indigenous knowledge that are scalable to the world. And I didn't always feel that way. I used to feel like indigenous knowledge and value, I thought it was important, and I respected it, but I kind of thought it belonged in a museum, something that you'd look at. But I now have learned that many of these practices are scalable, like the sharing you talked about. Imagine if the world, what is the term you used in Hawaiian? You called it
the ahupua.
Yeah. What is that exactly?
It's a land division from mountain to ocean, where basically from the mountain to the midlands to the ocean. That's how these mokus, these lands were kind of divided, and people would don't even want to say trade, but they would share.
Yeah.
And so it was just such a way to feed a community sustainably.
Right. So if someone had more than they needed, they'd share it around. Yeah, and I learned that from my anthropologist friend, Jared Diamond, told Christine and I, co-produced
Jared
the show.
Diamond in Papua New Guinea, huh?
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine, and he's on the show, and he's a fellow guest. That the Pacific Island communities are called renunciative societies, and I said, "What's renunciative mean?" He said, "It's renouncing your ownership of things to the community." And I said, "Oh, you mean like giving stuff away?" And he said, "No, it's different." He said, "It's like you never owned it. And it has a lot of important implications. It de-incentivizes taking too much, because if you're only going to pass it on, why build up a warehouse full of fish?"
Right.
And it also takes care of people in the community that don't have enough at the time. And it begins to smell a little bit like communism or socialism or something like that, but it's not. It's something else. And it's those kind of value systems that evolved, I think, in a very almost Darwinian sociobiology way, right? The societies that had those principles and those practices are survived. Those that didn't survive.
Right.
And I've become a believer in looking and studying and trying to find out which of these are scalable and which ones maybe should end up in the UN in treaties and in conventions. Some of these ideas. Renunciative or sharing is just one of them that I'm thinking of. And then there's another one here in Hawaii that Christine and I read about, called the law of the broken paddle or something. It was about it had to do with not allowing freedom of passage and not beating some. Do you know the story? It's not ringing a bell. Okay, I'll look it up after the show and send it to you. But it's anyway. I love your connection to that. Now you've woven it. It sounds to me like into your quote modern world,
Right.
And helping passing on that knowledge to people. And that's what we need to do, because first of all, most people haven't been in the ocean, and very, very few people dive, and then a very fewer sector dive like you do, and so I think you're like an ambassador, and your message really does need to get out there, and I really applaud what you do. But I also noticed, looking through your material, that you run into a lot of interesting animals, and I saw you with some sharks. Can you tell me any of that kind of part of it, the sharks? I mean, I'm a scuba diver, and I'm pretty comfortable with a tank on my back.
Right.
But when I'm free diving, I'm a little bit less comfortable when it comes to sharks out there. I mean, how do you deal with that side of
And
it?
for me, I'm the exact opposite, because I'm a free diver, and so when I have scuba gear on my back, I feel like I almost lose my language. I don't know how to, for me, when it comes to whether I'm trying to hunt an animal, or whether I'm trying to interact with an animal, or whether I'm trying to get away from an animal, body language is my language, and the language I speak is free diving. And so a lot of times if I have a tank on my back, I don't feel like I can speak as clearly. Whereas with free diving, I feel much more, I want to say in control, but I just feel, much more comfortable with that. And so sharks are something that I just kind of had to start getting comfortable with, because, in free diving and in spearfishing, you're going to come across them. And at first, if a big tiger shark were to come and steal my fish and rip my gear out of my hands, like, I would just...
That happened to you?
Yes, and my heart would just beat out of its chest, and I just would want to swim backwards and get as far away from it as possible. And then and then after a while, it happens again and again, and then
And it's like, well, give me my fish back.
Exactly. One time I was diving in Palau, actually, which I think that they're also just a really, really great nation when it comes to being leaders of ocean conservation as well. But I had speared this fish that I had worked so hard for. You know, I was being so selective. I just wanted this one fish and really worked my butt off for it. And when I was coming up, there were just all of these sharks just starting to like close in on it. And I just was pulling this fish up. Before I knew it, that whole thing of just wanting to get away from them was gone. It was just, I wanted that fish in my hands ASAP, and I started pulling it up faster and faster, and the sharks started coming up to me more and more. And before I knew it, though, I just grabbed my fish and I just swam at them because I was just so not ready to let this meal be taken from me. It was just like this hunter's instinct that just took over. But as soon as I changed, and I'm not just like saying like, oh, this is the formula, it's going to work every time. Of course, they're wild animals and there's always going to be a risk involved, but that day, for whatever reason, something in me just clicked.
Wow.
And I was not ready to just let my fish become shark food. And as soon as I did that, they changed too. And after that, I'd shoot fish and those same sharks would kind of come and I just look at them and they'd say, okay. And that's one thing I noticed about most sharks, you know, and everyone, like I said, it's a wild animal, it's different. You can't just make this cookie cutter application, but it's every single time I would just become too submissive. Not only would they take my fish, but they would be like a bully to me after that and come around and be ready to take my next fish and come around and be ready to kind of like bump me and push me. They're like the bully, you know, in school. But the minute I stood up to myself, then it was like, okay, like,
wow.
Rubbing it out.
I'm impressed. Yeah, my hat's off to you. I have experienced, you know, you got to stand up to a shark, but I've never ever, I don't think I've ever been able to do it like you have. So my hat's off to you on your, you know, and I'm gonna take a break here on the See As Many Voices podcast, but I would like to come back and talk about a couple things you've said where you really are exhibiting, to me, I'm hearing you talk about senses that I only think marine animals have, that you've picked up yourself. But we'll come back after a break for the See As Many Voices here with Kimi Werner this week. Thank you so much, Kimi. We'll come back,